Members of the Livingston Police Department discussing the events of September 11th. Right now I'm here with members of the Livingston Fire Department. Assistant Chief Chris Mullen, Deputy Chief Gary Stajak, and firefighters Lisa Battaglia, Josh Lewis, and Jim Osorio. Chris, maybe you could take us through your perspective on the events of September 11th.
September 11th, as we all know, started out as any other day. I was working in headquarters, fire headquarters, in fire prevention, and I was on the phone, and all of a sudden you hear on the radio, about the plane crashing into the towers, and obviously you didn't know whether it was a small commuter plane or what it was, so immediately went downstairs. We have a television in the squad room, turned the TV on, and sure enough, there's the news helicopters hovering over the towers. You could see the devastation, so I immediately, the chief was in his office, I called him out. Obviously we were all shocked. Everybody started to gather. The troops started, troops being the firefighters, started to migrate into headquarters, as happens a lot with any kind of either disaster, or accident, fire. And we watched from there, the events unfold. And unfortunately, we actually were watching and we see the second plane crash into the second tower. And it was just devastating. And then that's when we actually went into a different mode of operation. The fire chief immediately made contact with other township officials, Chuck Dehaney, the township manager. They put the emergency management plan into effect, coordinating with St. Barnabas having the burn center. We knew we had a good chance of getting a lot of burn victims, or a lot of victims in general, that might be transported. And throughout the day we had conflicting reports on different numbers of casualties that were coming, were supposedly coming to St. Barnabas. So the chief immediately made contact with St. Barnabas, the officials up there. He actually went up to their command post, emergency management center, and they were getting also information, I guess, from New York City fire, police, EMS, as to potential victims coming there. The big problem was that we had to plan for is decontamination. Because, again, as the police officers pointed out, you didn't know what actually was in the air, what the victims could have been contaminated with, so we had to set up decon operations up at the hospital. So I stayed back at the Livingston, our headquarters, and the chief was up at St. Barnabas, and he was more or less coordinating the decon. He got an engine company of our troops together, sent them up to the hospital. Actually, Gary, I believe, was with them. That was about...
It was about 6:30 or so. We took an engine company up. Josh here drove the engine. There's a couple more of our volunteers went up, and we just basically waited for the worst. We didn't know what we had. We didn't know whether we'd get 2 victims or 600 victims. So we brought our engine company up there to assist St. Barnabas staff in whatever they needed.
We initially, in preparation, we heard there was possibly 200 to 300 people coming to St. Barnabas. Luckily, it turned out to be, I think you had 1 or 2, and they were walk-ins.
I started off, I'm a school teacher in Bridgewater, and one of my colleagues came in and said a plane hit the towers, and I said, probably just an accident. I kind of disregarded it and went about my business, continuing teaching. And then the next period he came back in again. Another plane hit the tower. And I said,
right.
2 accidents. I still didn't think anything of it, and I had to prep the next period, and I went out into the hallway, and some of the teachers had received phone calls from loved ones that were in the towers, and were just hysterical in the hallway. And then, as they said, news kind of spread very quickly, I'm sure, throughout Bridgewater's fire departments as well. And parents were just coming in, dragging their kids out of school, literally. Backpacks were left in the hallway, daddy's in New York City, daddy's in the towers, or, your uncle so-and-so's on the fire department, he's in there, and just dragging them out. And we got our assignment, was about 9:30 that night, that he needed people to go in, and...
We received, as Lisa said, we received a call from the Essex County Fire Coordinator under the County Mutual Aid Program. The chief was up at the hospital at the time, so when he called, as they said, Gary says, something of this magnitude, the squad room fills up, and to a certain point, everybody wants to jump in and help. But at the same time, you have to sort of tell them, just stand fast until we can organize things and we can actually get a handle on what we have to do. But they requested that our department mobilize a rescue truck and an engine company to go on this. We had to meet at Seton Hall on September 12th. We had to meet there at 7 o'clock in the morning. So as myself and Gary, Lisa, Josh, and Jim, there were only a few of the members, the other members.
There's
That,
11 of us.
yeah, we had 11 total. And, you know, we went down, we met with the coordinator as a group, all towns in Essex County. You know, we all met down there as like a rendezvous point, and then they were led in by escort into Staten Island.
I think we had 28 pieces of apparatus.
Yeah,
and
throughout
a
the
lot
county.
That came in together.
Consisting of engine companies, rescue companies, heavy rescue, truck companies, ambulances, all kinds of stuff. And once we got to Staten Island, we got to the headquarters of Rescue 5, which was, they were on the initial alarm. They responded on the initial alarm into the towers. And unfortunately, Gary, Lisa, and Jimmy were stationed at that house where they lost, I believe it was 11 members.
Off of Rescue 5.
It was 13 out of 14.
Josh,
It was 11 out of, on that crew that they had that day, there was 11 out of their 12 guys didn't make it. So it was,
and you're finding that out on...
that was our staging area. So that was, aside from the commotion of trying to get everybody where they needed to go, it was also the firehouse that lost. I would assume it's probably they lost the most
percentage
of one company.
Yeah, they lost. Again, when we got there, that was our meeting point, and then when we got there, we had I think it was a battalion chief or something from New York City. They'd yell out, everybody come together. They want the officers from each department to come together, and they'd just bark out, you know, Livingston, like I was assigned, our company, 5, was assigned to Brownsville, Brooklyn. Gary stayed in the quarters of company Rescue 5. They were acting rescue that was for the whole city, because we have a heavy rescue unit. There was another department, North Caldwell, was stationed with them. Everybody.
We were taking places of the companies that were at the scene, more or less, so
Yeah.
the general public understands that.
We didn't go.
We were running the calls that the firemen would be running if they were still in the fire.
We didn't actually have to go. We covered the empty firehouses.
Right.
Is what we did. One thing that stood out for me is when we staged at Seton Hall before we went to Staten Island, and the highways were closed, the bridges were closed, everything was closed going in. So all it was all the emergency equipment. I think, like Lisa said, it was like 28 pieces of apparatus going in, with the police escort from, you know, in the front and from behind us. And it was, as you're driving by, all the cars that were coming out were honking their horns, were waving, and all it is just all the towns in Jersey going in there to help.
Bridge, and these truck drivers they're blowing air horns and give us the thumbs up.
And a lot of times you feel like you're not appreciated sometimes. And to see people who know that we have nothing to do with it, we're coming from a different state to go and help people that we don't know.
Right.
New York's never called mutual aid ever.
Right, they've never called for mutual aid.
Yeah, there are a department of 12,000 members, numerous companies. I mean, obviously, as I said, even New York City couldn't prepare for anything.
They're the best fire department in the world.
They are.
So calling for mutual aid when they have already 12,000 firefighters.
Something they're not used to.
There's no need for them to call mutual aid in
That's the
that
magnitude of the
day.
situation.
Yeah.
So as you're going into the city, there's this feeling that people are supporting you.
Yeah, it was
What's
great.
the anxiety level as you're driving in, though?
I think the biggest anxiety for probably all of us is because as we were going in, we didn't know what we were going to be assigned to. Were we going to ground zero? Were we just going to be
Right.
sitting at a firehouse? We didn't know what we were going to see on the way in, what we were going to counter. I mean, we all heard, you know, X amount of people had died, X amount of people were injured. How many of those were we going to have to help, you know, emotionally, physically? Were we going to be fighting fires directly on ground zero? We just didn't know what we were heading into, how to prepare ourselves for it. Like if there's a house fire, we know, okay, somebody's going to hit the hydrant, somebody's going to grab the nozzle, somebody's going to guard the door. You know, we all have our assignments, what to do, and we can prepare for it. But in this situation, it could have been anything.
Especially where we were, Rescue 5. It's an elite rescue company. It's what they call the best of the best. The firemen are picked, chosen to go to that rescue company. We were assigned to run their runs for 2 days. We actually slept at the firehouse. We didn't know what we were getting into.
But we were expecting a 12-hour shift. When we were sent in 12 hours, we said, okay, we got there, and they said, oh, you're the only rescue company in the entire city. You're not leaving until we can find a replacement.
How long did that end up?
It was 32 hours that we
32
were
hours.
there.
Wow.
I said to the dispatcher, I said, well, give me an idea. How many runs do they average a day? He goes, anywhere from 15 to 25 runs a day. So I grabbed my people, and I said, we got to talk here. We got to make sure we're ready for anything. And it was just that the city was quiet, except for that disaster.
Yeah.
Everybody in the city was on their best behavior,
Yeah.
It was fire prevention, as you were taught as a kid. So we actually only went on 2 calls in 35 hours or 36 hours.
But the thing that stands out most in my mind, I think, and Josh, we saw it firsthand, we're having lunch in the firehouse with guys from company 231 they came in off duty, stuff like that. And as we went out, we rode, because obviously we don't know the neighborhood, we were assigned Captain Dugan. I don't know his first name. He's a FDNY captain at another company somewhere in the city, but he was assigned to Brownsville.
He's the one that's in that picture with the fireman climbing the ladder.
It's not the picture that everybody sees with the 3 guys. It was one that was on the New York Post. I believe it was the Post or the Daily News on the 12th. And we're sitting there having lunch, and one of the guys, he's reading the paper, and one of the other firemen, New York City guys, says, "Hey, Captain, there you are. You're on the front page." And this is a guy. He had to be 6'3", 250, 260. I mean, tough of the tough. And this guy looks at it, he's looking at the paper, and all of a sudden you see him start breaking out crying. And I mean, at that time, at least for me, I'm saying, these are New York City, these are people that every firefighter in the country looks up to. All the national standards, a lot of them are New York City. All our equipment is tested by New York City Fire Department. And these are the toughest guys that see probably the most action possibly in the world. And here's a guy, fully grown man, 6'3", and he's crying. I mean, it was so emotional because, again, hundreds of people they lost, their own people, not counting all the civilians. It was
And they still
devastating.
did their job.
Yeah.
They still,
didn't stop.
that's right.
They didn't stop to mourn. We still have a city to protect.
That's right.
We still have a city to protect, and we have to go find our men also.
And one thing that was nice was, I know for me, I've done mutual aid in other cities in New Jersey. And as a volunteer, sometimes you feel a little intimidated when you go to towns that are paid. And so I was really intimidated by going to New York City. Right. And the firemen did not make you feel like that at all. They made us feel
like you were at home.
Like when we left, every single guy stood at the door and gave us a hug as we walked out, and with tears in their eyes thanked us for being there, for putting our lives off to the side to go help them when they asked, especially in a time like that. And under certain circumstances, people will always go and help. And something like that, it's kind of tough. I remember Chief saying when he was asking for people to volunteer to come up with a list to go over there, he says, I can't make anybody do it because it's not a normal situation. If we were going to ground zero, we didn't know that. More buildings could have come down, and nobody could expect anybody else to do that. And these firemen were so grateful that we didn't care. We didn't ask where we were going, what we were doing. We just went to help, and you actually felt like you were part of them, like you were on the same level as those guys were. And like Chris said, they're the elite. They are the best.
So like the police officers were saying, where they sensed even a stronger bond between fellow officers and firefighters, you're saying even with that elite group of New York City firefighters,
yes.
There was no caste system that day.
And like the police officers had said too, like the relationship between the cops and the firemen. When we were there, a cop car pulled up in front, and it was just packed from every inch of the car with food.
As far as being a little intimidated going in, like Josh was saying, with a paid fire department, I think it was a little bit more so to some extent for me as a female. I wasn't sure how they would react to that. And when I got there was a couple of guys that were like, oh, your husband is in there or your boyfriend's in there. Like, no, I'm actually here with the guys. And you could see the surprise on their face, but I think that given they obviously don't work with females on that particular station, as soon as they knew I was, one of the firefighters, I was just accepted right in, which was really great, especially once Rescue 5 came back also. They dug it out and brought it back to the station, and it was just unbelievable. There was shrapnel that had gone through the doors. The roof was caved in because it's all skylights all on top, so it just filled up. And we just kind of stood back. We, again, like Josh said, they're kind of their own group. They're a very tight-knit group. We weren't sure how far they were going to let us in.
Exactly.
And Jimmy just jumped right in. He just started helping. And then we were like, all right.
Everything off.
They didn't yell at him to back off, so then we all just jumped in. We just emptied the whole thing, helped them clean it up. And these firefighters were amazing. They were like, okay, we need a windshield, we need lights, we need this, we need that.
We had people bringing windshields in, doors in.
And they just took the whole thing apart and put it back together again. It was incredible. And by the time we left,
that truck.
by the time we left, it was back.
It only
in service.
lasted a week after we rebuilt it, but
They lost
So
their
it had to be
transmission.
they lost the transmission after that.
A quick rebuild. You're saying Rescue
Yeah.
5.
It was in
is-
service the next day, actually.
Yeah.
There's
I
one-
mean, it wasn't. There were still lights.
Just for the
missing.
record, there's one rescue truck in each borough, so there's only 5 units. And as they said, all the other units, all the rescue units were, from what I understand, went to ground zero. But Rescue 5 was, unfortunately, I
out,
think 1 and
basically.
2, Rescue 1 and 2, which is Manhattan and Brooklyn, I think they were totally lost. All the members, everything, unfortunately. But 5, these guys were acting 5. Another thing, Josh, and we have another guy that was with us, J.R. Crawford. I had myself, Josh, J.R. Crawford, Dave Russo, Anthony
Cooney.
Del Tufo, and Darren Cooney. They were the men that were with me. In Brooklyn, when Engine 231 came back, they parked their rig out in the street. We stripped everything down, and as the police officers were saying, obviously we didn't get into ground zero, but the soot that came off and the powder and, as they said, the oatmeal substance all over this rig.
It was inside, outside, it was everywhere.
Josh and JR pointed out to me, as we're hosing the thing down, they looked down and we see a piece of paper on the ground. It's all burned, all the way around it. So I pick it up. It's wet, and it's a ticket. It's a taxi receipt with a confirmation number and a handwritten total from United Airlines. Taxi receipt, and that was, we're over in Brooklyn, and we're all still trying to figure out in our minds what's actually happening here, And we're there doing our job, but you don't know what's going on. It's almost like time stopped and
Here
in
we
slow
found
motion.
a piece of paper from the airplane that was
And it's-
inside that building. Somehow it got on the roof of the fire truck that we were covering for.
Gives you an idea how close that fire truck probably was.
The fire truck had to be really close.
And it was burned almost like somebody took it and just burned the edges. But you could read clear as day, United Airlines, and it had a confirmation number. And it was, it's even though we didn't get there, it's like, here it is, right in this rig. And
But by seeing that it was handwritten, it had a handwritten note
you got
on
to
it.
think who was the last
Somebody
person.
was sitting in a chair that had that, and obviously they're not here anymore. And you just really wonder who.
There were, as we were emptying Rescue 5, there were a lot of papers also that were on the ground, and we just emptying it. It's a couple steps up to get into it, so they were throwing out bags, and those of us that were on the ground catching stuff, we were just covered head to toe
with stuff.
in the soot. And it didn't actually hit me at first what those papers were. They were papers from the towers, and I kept asking myself as I was picking them up and gathering them, why are they keeping files on Rescue 5? It didn't hit me for a while, and then I actually stopped and looked at one. I said, oh my God, who knows what floor from the tower this came from, and now here it is in my hands on Staten Island. That kind of blew my mind.
I also like to mention Lisa and Jim were with us on our rescue company number 1. Martin Casper drove that day. He was with us. He couldn't be with us today. And also
Anthony
Sabaro.
Excellent. Thank you guys for mentioning those names too, and definitely thank you for coming here today and sharing your perspectives on how much you guys did for the victims and the families and the borough of New York City on September 11th. We're really proud to have you here in Livingston.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that'll do it for the Buzz 34 for this week. Thanks for watching our first episode, and a special thanks, obviously, to the Livingston Police Department and the Livingston Fire Department. Thank you once again.